Let's go back to the summer of 1939. Two men show up at a quiet cabin on Long Island, and they're carrying a secret so huge, so world-altering, it would not only reshape history but hang over our future forever. This is the story of the fire they were about to unleash on the world. So just picture it for a second. The world is teetering on the edge of a massive war, but this is something new. Two physicists, Leo Szilard and Eugene Wigner, they understand that a recent scientific discovery could lead to a weapon with power that's just unimaginable. And they know there's only one person with enough influence to get the world to listen: Albert Einstein.
So what exactly was this terrifying new science? Well, the story of the atomic bomb doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a simple realization and a letter that would change everything. Okay, so the core idea here is something called nuclear fission, basically splitting an atom. Now, German scientists were the ones who first discovered this process, but it was Leo Szilard who had the terrifying light bulb moment. He realized you could create a chain reaction. Think of it like a single domino, but instead of knocking over just one more, it sets off a cascade that topples millions, all in the blink of an eye. That's the kind of insane energy we're talking about, a tidal wave of power from a tiny bit of matter. And this is what kept them up at night. The very scientists who discovered fission were in Germany. So the thought of Adolf Hitler, a man already dragging Europe into war, getting his hands on an atomic weapon first? That nightmare scenario was so horrifying that it convinced Albert Einstein, a famous pacifist, that he had no choice but to act.
What's really wild is just how fast this all happened. I mean, within months of the initial discovery, a letter is on the desk of President Roosevelt urging him to get a hold of uranium and ramp up research. And his response? An initial budget of just $6,000. Talk about a tiny seed for what would grow into an absolute monster of a project.
Right, so that small investment, it was about to explode into the Manhattan Project, a top-secret, all-out race to build the bomb before anyone else. And to lead the whole scientific side of things, the US government picked one of the most unlikely, most controversial candidates you could possibly imagine. This really gets to the heart of the J. Robert Oppenheimer paradox. On paper, this guy was a huge security risk. No Nobel Prize, zero experience managing anything, let alone a project this massive. But the military head of the project, General Leslie Groves, he saw something else. He saw this fierce, overweening ambition, and a mind that was second to none. Groves literally bet his entire career on Oppenheimer, deciding that raw genius and drive were way more important than a perfect resume. It was a crazy gamble.
And just look at the scale this thing reached. From that initial $6,000, the budget ballooned to $2 billion, which is just an insane amount of money for the 1940s. They built a secret city, Los Alamos, out on a remote mesa in New Mexico with over 125,000 people working on this, all focused on building a weapon that, up until then, was pure theory. So all that work, all that money, all those secrets, it all came down to one single moment. July 16th, 1945, in the middle of the New Mexico desert. They called the test Trinity, and honestly, nobody knew for sure what was going to happen next. You have to understand, their fear wasn't just that the bomb might fail, it was that it might succeed too well. Some of the smartest people on the planet had calculated that there was a tiny, but not zero chance that the detonation could set off a chain reaction in the Earth's atmosphere, literally setting the sky on fire and ending all life on the planet. And they pushed the button anyway. At 5:29 in the morning, the world changed. The first thing was the heat. It was so intense, hotter than the surface of the sun. It instantly flash-fused the desert sand below it into a new, strange green glass that they later called Trinidite. And then came the Force, the device which they'd nicknamed the Gadget, unleashed the power of 21,000 tons of TNT. The 100-foot steel tower it was sitting on, it didn't melt, it didn't collapse. It was just vaporized, gone in an instant. And finally, there was the image that would define the new age, the mushroom cloud, this churning, terrifying pillar of fire and dust, rocketing more than 7 miles into the sky, announcing that the atomic age had officially and terrifyingly begun. You know, in the seconds after it worked, there wasn't cheering. There was just this stunned silence, this awe, and this dawning horror. The test director, Kenneth Bainbridge, he just turned to Oppenheimer, and his words pretty much summed up the grim new reality they'd just created. But it's Oppenheimer's own thoughts that have echoed through history. As he watched that terrible, beautiful fire, his mind flashed to a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. He understood, in that moment, that science had given humankind the power of a god, the power to literally destroy its own world.
So, the theory was proven, the weapon was real, and now the story shifts from a test site in a remote desert to the crowded cities of Japan, where this new fire wasn't going to be a test, it was going to be an act of war.
The decision was made with brutal speed. Less than 3 weeks after the Trinity test, the bomb was used. On August 6th, a B-29 bomber called the Enola Gay dropped Little Boy on the city of Hiroshima. Just 3 days after that, Fat Man was dropped on Nagasaki. The number of people killed instantly, it's just staggering. But numbers on a screen, they can't capture the reality. To even begin to understand what this was like, you have to listen to the people who were there. This account, from a survivor named Akiko Takakura, describes a scene that is just, it's pure hell on earth. A world turned completely upside down in a flash of light. The destruction was absolute. 70% of the city's buildings gone. A firestorm swept through what was left. But for the people who somehow survived the blast and the fire, a new invisible killer was waiting: radiation sickness. By the end of the year, the death toll had almost doubled as people died from this horrible new kind of poison. So the bombs did end the war, but they kicked off this huge moral crisis, a crisis that would haunt the very people who created them and would go on to define the rest of the century and our world today. And you can see this conflict perfectly in the clash between the weapon's creator and the man who ordered its use. Oppenheimer was just eaten alive by guilt. He told President Truman, "I feel I have blood on my hands." But Truman, who made the call, had zero patience for it. He saw the bomb as a tool that ended a brutal war and famously called Oppenheimer a crybaby scientist. And this brings us right back to the beginning, to Albert Einstein, the man whose signature was on that letter that started the whole thing. He looked back on it later with just immense regret. The whole project, remember, was born out of the fear that the Nazis would get a bomb first, a fear that, in the end, turned out to be completely wrong. So the bomb didn't end war, not by a long shot. What it did was create a totally new kind of global terror. It sparked a crazy arms race that, at its peak, saw over 70,000 nuclear weapons on the planet. And that threat is still very much with us. Old treaties are falling apart, new arms races are starting, and the risk that these weapons could be used, either by accident or on purpose, is actually growing. The story of the first atomic bomb is really a warning, one that's written in fire and ash. It's the story of the moment humanity finally gained the power to cause its own extinction. The fire they lit in that desert almost 80 years ago is still burning, and it leaves all of us with the most important question of our time. Now that we've built the ultimate weapon of death, do we have the wisdom to choose life?